Okay, so I want to go over how to flat colors. Flatting colors would be the simple explanation is it's just a layer with a block of color underneath an ink layer. And so if I were to come in here like this and do something, hold on my 1 second. My thing is not working. So I have a little automated thing called a Stream Deck.
Oh, you got Stream Deck. I feel you.
Yes. Why is it over there? It's weird. It is acting very strange. Just a second. Let's try this one more time. All right.
You want that? Oh, it's my baby.
There we go.
It's mine.
There we go. Okay, so I will do that, and then I press this button, and that's it. So I'll show you how to do that, but that's basically what we're looking for. This would be considered a flat color. It can really be any color, because then after the fact you can come in, and if you hold down Alt or Option and click in between those layers, we can go in and we can paint anything on top of it. And so I can come in and, kind of do that, and then I can come in and, grab a darker color and start to paint in shadows. And because I have it flatted, it doesn't exceed the boundaries of that thing, and so I don't have to be precious or slow. I can scribble, I can come in and do all kinds of different stuff. And so that's the benefit of flatting things, is you can be really fast when you're coloring after the fact. Questions on that?
No, looks good.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
Yeah, so let me show you how the steps that I do to do that. Now, I like
to have a closed shape, right? Or can you
Yeah,
use like the
that's a good
polygonal
question.
lasso too?
So you can also use the polygonal lasso tool. So if I came in, let's say I didn't have a closed shape on my inks, right?
Mhm.
And I came in and I did that, and then so I select outside of this, and the first step is Command Shift I, which inverts the selection, right? And then I would go in with my paint bucket tool and I'd fill inside of that. Oops, sorry, new layer. Fill inside of that. And you notice that it missed part of that because this was open, right? So there's two things that you can do. One is that you can go in and you can just edit the selection. And the other one is you can go, oh, Frank's in the chats. Hi, Frank. The other one is you can go in and you can just do the selection. So if I wanted to edit the selection, let's go back here. I'm gonna grab this polygonal or magic wand tool, which is W. Click on that, Command Shift I, right? And if you want to check your selection, you can hit the letter Q, and it'll toggle back and forth. And if you paint while you're inside of Q, you can actually paint that selection. And then you hit Q again, and it goes back, right? And so one is, it's just, I forget what this is called, like quick mask, I think it is.
Okay.
The other one would be, I can go in with my polygonal lasso tool, which is L, and then I can hit plus on my polygonal lasso tool, which would be Shift, and I can add to this selection. And what I'm doing, let me zoom in. What I'm doing is I'm splitting the inks. Okay, so I'm going to come in like this, and I'll hit plus, and I come in and I'm just going to split this line down the middle, and then close it off like that, and it adds all that to the selection. So those are 3 ways to do it. basically all using the magic wand tool, and then either using quick selection or the other one. If you're doing it a traditional way, I'm going to press Command D to undo that. A traditional way would be that you're going to use the polygonal lasso tool, and you just split these inks like this. And if you're using like a drawing tablet, then you can come in. Spacebar will help you move around, right? And if you hold Alt or Option, then you can just click and drag and draw, and it'll turn into the lasso tool instead of the polygonal lasso tool. And when you go, then it'll go back to polygonal lasso. So if there's ever something curved, you can just quickly just kind of hold Alt and draw around the curve. But this is what it takes so long. So we go in here, and then I'm just going to guess. Yeah, we'll just close that off like that.
Okay.
So I'll just do this real quick. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple more things on some of the selections that will be helpful. So the idea is that you want your fill, your flat colors. You don't want them to be along the edge of your inks, because then you get a little halo. You get a little like glowing thing, and so you want them inside of your inks. But you don't want them like, I wouldn't want to put it here, because then I'm going to have that little spot.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I miss, I can always just kind of like circle back if I want and grab it again, or after the fact I can come in. So let's say I double click right here. Okay. And so I missed this big part. I can still come in and be like, oh man, that's done. So I'm with polygonal lasso, hold shift, come in and grab that. Right. And if I like come outside of it, okay, then I can be like, oh, I'm going to shave that off. So I can hold Alt or Option, and it'll turn into a minus selection. Okay, so then I can come in, and you can add stuff or subtract stuff. That's the basic gist of it. And then I would just create a new layer with a layer underneath this layer. Choose a fill color, and when you're filling, you want to turn anti-alias off. So what aliasing does is it kind of like softens the edges of things, but we don't want soft edges for this. And so you turn anti-alias off, and I'll show you the difference of that. So I'm gonna go like that, and then I'll do another one. Put anti-alias on, and then turn anti-alias on. Okay, all right. Let's take a look at those two edges. So you see this little, I don't know if it's coming through, but you see how it's like a little bit on the edge that's kind of softer?
Mm-hmm.
That just makes it a little bit harder to select. Whereas this one has the same thing, because I think I didn't turn the aliasing off on the selection tool. So you want alias, you don't want anti-alias on your selection tool and your fill color. So then you just take your ink layer and your color layer and just Command G to group them. And that's the basics. And so let me just show you. Hey, what are you doing, bud? Having a rough day? Okay, put it away in the garbage can. That's fine, but you don't need to scream. Hey, Scar, I think you're being helpful, but you shushing him is actually making it harder, because he's just screaming at you. All right, so so if I go in like this and I go, I'm gonna get my magic wand tool, which is this one, and it's W. Okay, and I'm gonna take my anti-alias off. Okay, and this is where you'd want contiguous on because it's a closed shape, right? And so if it's a closed shape, it's way faster to just do it this way. So I'm going to go like this. I'm going to click on this on the outside of it because I've got all this stuff on the inside that would make it really hard. Okay, and so the outside of it. If the inside was, if I had something like this, if I had another layer that was, just really simple, something like that. Okay, then I could totally just do the inside here like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'll show you both outside and inside. So the outside one, I'm going to click on the outside of this. Okay. And then I'm going to do a couple steps. The first step is I want to invert the selection. So if we hit Q, you can see that all the white stuff is selected, all the red stuff is not selected. Okay. And so to invert the selection, I press Command I. Sorry. To invert the selection, I press Command Shift I. Or I go to Select Inverse.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then once I have that and I hit Q, you'll see that now it's inside. But if we look really closely, we've got these little halo gaps. Okay. And so now what we want to do is we want to tighten up the selection. And so then I'm going to go back to selection. Sorry, I hit Q again. So I'm going to go back to selection and I'm going to go to, where did it go? Modify. And I'm going to go contract. I'm just going to contract it, I don't know, 2 or 3 pixels, right? And you can kind of test it out to see what works. And now when we zoom in, so now it's inside of that ink layer.
Okay.
Right? And so then when you create a new layer, put that layer underneath and fill it with a color, you'll notice that the color is inside of that. It's inside of that ink layer. So if I turn the transparency down on this ink layer, you can see that the color falls short of the edge of that ink layer.
Right.
Okay. So the other option is exactly the same thing, but just in the opposite. And so what I would do is I'd come in here and I would do the inside, and then I can even hold Shift and do the inside of this, right? And then instead of contracting it, I want to expand it so that it cuts into that ink line. And so I'd go Select, Modify, Expand, and I'll expand it. And then when I expand it, you see that it cuts into that ink line. Then I would come in and, make sure you're on a new layer and hit it. And then when you'd want to watch out for things like this. There's like a little bit right there, and you can just take a paintbrush and paint that in. Another way of doing it, so there's no real right or wrong way of doing it. But another way that you could do it is, I'll do this in green just to differentiate here, is I could take a paintbrush here and just paint kind of a continuous line like this. Okay, and when I close that off, hit the inside, expand the fill it in, and then I can do the next little section. This is easier with a drawing tablet. Close that off, hit that, expand, fill it. So that's kind of a few different ways of doing it. Now, because you're going to do the same steps over and over and over again, I would create an action in Photoshop that just does those steps. You guys know how to create an action?
I watched a YouTube video that did it. I couldn't tell you how to do it right now, but
Okay, so I'll just create a new action here. So I'll do one that does the inverse and then fills it. Okay, so I'm going to select the outside of the shape. That's how it is. So select this. So I'll select the outside of the shape. Okay, so you don't want to press record until you want your action to start. So I want my action to start after I already have a selection on the outside. And so then I'm going to go to my action thing, and I'm going to go new, and name it whatever you want. Okay. And then right here, you can add a function key. So I'm going to say Command F1 or whatever, right? Just think of whatever is going to be the easiest for you to push, right? And then when you hit record, everything that you do until you hit stop will be recorded as a step. And then all of it will be bound in that order to that function key, which was, what did we say, Command F1? Okay, so I'm going to hit record. And then I'm going to go select inverse, select modify contract. I think I press delete to fill. And then I'm going to press Command D to deselect. Oh, okay. And I messed it up. So I'm going to press stop. I forgot to create a new layer and put it underneath. So, but you can see in my test that it goes inverse contract by 2 pixels, because that's what I told it to do. Fill using background color, and then select it from that. So I'm going to try this again if I delete it. And let's try it one more time.
Do you have to create those actions every time you open Photoshop up for a
No.
new document?
The cool thing is it saves them to your profile, so
Oh,
they're in there permanently. Yeah, and that's how I've done this. So I have this thing. This is a Stream Deck,
Mhm.
and all I've done is I've just put different buttons in here, and like this one, it just pushes that whatever the function key is that I bound to that Photoshop action. It makes it really fast.
yeah.
And so, but if you remember, I don't know, a little post-it note or something, because it's not like you're going to be flat and colored all the time. Here, let me try this again. Okay, so I'm going to select the outside, and then I'm going to create a new. I'll go. Okay. Go Command F2. Make it orange. Go record. Okay, so I'm going to invert. Select inverse. Select modify contract 2 pixels. And you notice over here that it's adding each of these steps. Okay, and I'm going to add a layer, and I'm going to command left bracket to lower that layer down, and then I'm going to command delete to fill that layer, and command D to deselect that layer, and then I can go back to my action and I can turn it off. Now it has all those things, so I can test it. Let's do that. Okay, so let's test it with another thing. So I'm going to just create another layer inside the screen. And do some links. Okay, and then or something. Okay, so then I'm going to select the outside of that and press Command F2. Nothing else. F2. Change the color. Oh, right, because I have to press function on my keyboard. Why isn't it working? Do that. And then function shift F2. No. You can also, if the keys aren't working, the key binding isn't working, you can also just play it. So you can just select your actions in this menu and then just press play and it'll run through it. I didn't have these pixels selected that time. So if I go in and I say test fill, play. It's not doing it. It's filling it with white. I don't know why it's filling it with my background color. But it was doing it with this. So it's hard. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So it did it each time, but it was filling it with white. Go here, select, play. Oh, it does it for you.
So it's just taking your background.
Yeah. Hi, Mary. How's it going? You got Mary McDaniel with us. Yeah, so it was just doing the background color instead of the foreground color. And then you can also, because it'll keep that layer selected, you can press Command U, and you can go in and you can shift the color with your hue saturation. And honestly,
Oh,
it doesn't matter what color the layer is, because it's really easy if you separate all these layers just after the fact, go in and either fill them, go in and decide on the color palette after the fact or whatever. So while you're flatting, just make sure that they're different colors. It doesn't matter if the colors make any sense.
Hmm.
Okay, questions on flatting?
just with the color thing, sometimes when I was trying out some stuff, like if I had a brush, like a stroke I had, or inked, I guess, a shape or something. Anyways, I couldn't change the color of that brush afterward. And same with filling an object or something, like how it is red here. I couldn't go back and change that
You
by
could
selecting
change the red.
it. Couldn't change the red. And maybe I'm just bringing over what I've done from Illustrator and I couldn't figure it out in Photoshop.
Okay,
But
so the brush, if you're you're talking about creating a new brush?
just changing the color of that brush after it's already been drawn. Like I had drawn the
Right.
brush, like
Yeah, so in Photoshop, it thinks about things differently because it's working in pixels rather
right,
than in vector. And so vector, you've got a clear thing where it's an object and the computer knows that this object is being assigned a color. But in
right.
Photoshop, the brushes, they just put pixels down and they're not smart.
They're not actually like shapes or a
Right.
path.
So it doesn't have like a fill and a stroke or anything. It's just squares. And
Okay.
so the one way that you can get around that is if I come in here and I start doing like, purple stuff, and then let me make my brush bigger. So I'm coloring this in, and then I do this happens quite a bit. I'll do like a slightly different purple on accident, and then be like, oh no, I actually want all of that to be the same color, right?
Hmm.
You can kind of come in, add a layer option over the top of it, and then you can fill it with like whatever color you want with your paint bucket tool. And then you can just smash those together. So you select both of them and press Command E, and then it's all like that. So
Okay.
but it's a lot different than Illustrator because they're not smart. They don't have there's no attributes panel in
Right.
Photoshop, whereas there might be, but it would do something completely different because the attributes panel in Illustrator is like this object has the following criteria to it. But in Photoshop, it's like this layer has some pixels in it. This layer has some other pixels in it. And the pixels are all just it's transparency and color. That's the only information that they have.
That's interesting. Okay. That's like a total mind shift.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the challenge is if you learn Illustrator before Photoshop seems super weird. And if you learn Photoshop before Illustrator seems super weird. And so if you just try to think of them the way that they think, one just puts squares down, it just does pixels, and the other one is dealing in anchor points and paths. And if
Right.
you kind of, even though the interface looks very similar, they think about things very differently because the raster vector thing.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. I don't know if I made that more confusing or
No,
not.
that made sense. It's going to be like a roundabout way to change colors because in Illustrator you just click on your shape.
Right. The easiest way is if you do have a big solid color is you can just press Command U and it brings up your hue saturation adjustment, and you can press colorize, and then you can just dial it in like this. And this is a lot like your HSB color
Right.
palette in Illustrator.
And that was Command U or Control U probably.
Yeah, and all of that is going to be under image adjustments. And
Okay.
so there's all of these different things that you can do and one of them is hue saturation.
Okay.
There's a couple cool things that like auto color, and there's one of them I can't remember. I don't use these very much because they're newer and I got used to them. There's this one called replace color. I think there are some ways where you can go in and say, hey, everything that's in this document that's this blue, make it a green instead, and it'll go do it for you. But I don't know how accurate it is. I haven't used it a lot. So
Okay. All right.
cool. Other questions?
So back to that. Sorry, Colby.
No, you're all good. Go for it. I'm keeping up just fine. Carry on.
Anyways, back to that scarf or handkerchief thing that you had. You had different colorings of shading and stuff. Did you color those with the inks on first, like on top? And
Yeah.
then,
So I inked it.
yeah.
Right?
And then you did your flat color.
I flat colored it.
Uh-huh.
And then after the fact, I went in. So I'll do it one of two ways. I'll show you both here if you're interested. So if I have like, I'll do a new layer. If I've got something like this, I'll start with like a midtone. So sometimes I'll come in and I'll just say, there's my midtone value. And then I'll come into my color picker by double clicking on the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And you can kind of adjust it from here. So I might go, I want it to be a little bit yellower and a little bit closer to white. And that's my highlight color. And then if you hold Alt with a brush, you can get your color picker out and double click on there again. And I'll say I want it to be a little bit redder, a little bit darker. And I'll make that my midtone or my shadow. So then I can come in and I'll flat my midtone, right? And so I'll come in and I can just eyedrop this, and I'll, let's say that this is my shade. Okay, and then I'll just eyedrop, and I'll put shadows in where they make sense. And you can do what's called a pixel lock. So on a layer, you have like 4 different ways to lock a layer. One of them is called a pixel lock, and the pixel lock is when you press that, it means that it will not go past it. Only it maintains the transparency. So wherever there are not pixels, there will still not be pixels. And so I can come in and just get kind of the edges of some of these things like that, and then eyedrop, and I can come in and get my highlights going like this. That's one way of doing it. Okay. Another way of doing it, and I did this for a while. It's a little bit more complicated, but I'll show you. So I'm just going to go back to just this color and then delete that part. So I still have my stuff. Okay. So I'm just going to take these two and smash them together. Okay. So here's my layer. Okay. Actually, I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to cut my Command X, Command Shift V. That's how it's on there. Okay, so now I have this. I can come in down here. There's a little half circle, or there's a circle that's half filled in. And it's got a bunch of what are called adjustment layers.
Yeah.
And these adjustment layers, they do all kinds of different things. One of them is called solid color. So if I go solid color, I can make this whatever color I want. This actually might be what you're talking about. And then I can apply that by holding Alt or Option and clicking in between those layers. And it comes with its own mask. And in Photoshop, a mask is black is hidden, white is shown. And so I'm going to press Command I to invert that mask so it's all black. And then I will paint white on the mask where I want that to show up. And here's the cool part about this. Then I can double click on this and I can change the color. And it's changing the color of that layer, but the mask is only letting it show through on certain parts, right?
Right.
And, so
and can you do multiple of those?
Yeah. So then I
Okay.
can come in and I can say, let's create another solid color.
Oh,
I'm going to make this my shadow. So, and then I click apply there. And here's the cool part. As I can do all of this stuff, right? But I can also do stuff like this. And instead of this being a color, I can make it grayscale. I'm going to go dark gray there. I'm going to go light gray here. And then I'm going to take this and turn it to multiply. And take this and turn it to stream or overlay.
oh, and do like a
And
blending
it,
mode thing.
right. And then the blending modes make it so that it's like a shadow.
Oh,
or a highlight.
cool.
And so instead of choosing colors, I can come in and do it that way, right? And then
Yeah.
if I and then it starts to act a lot more like Illustrator,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I could put another one underneath this and just make it make this one like the full colored thing, right? And whatever color I change that to, the other two adjust because they're blended down.
Okay, I'm glad you showed me that because that's been my frustrating thing. It's like I can't change my colors.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and just try.
This is a complicated way of doing it, but it is a way that maintains a ton of control.
Right.
And so you don't have to like know what color everything is going to be from the start because you can just change it whenever you want.
Yeah.
So it works pretty well. And then I like to, after the fact, just come in with like a radial gradient, and you can kind of like turn the opacity down. And that radial gradient, you choose the one that goes from, you go to basics, choose the one that goes from your foreground color to transparency. And then you just come in and just warm things up or cool things off. You apply that like that, and then you blend it. Usually overlay or whatever else. And it'll start to mix with the thing, and then you can still come in and you can adjust the colors of it with your Q saturation adjustment command.
Oh, cool.
So, and if you look at a lot of my illustrations are like that. Where you see, that's not a you. This. See a lot of those.
Mm.
I have a flat color. I do highlights and shadows, and then I come in and I'll do radial gradient to warm things up and cool things off.
Okay.
Okay, we've got a comment from Mary in the chats. Can you connect your iPad and Illustrator so that you can draw easier in Photoshop? USB-C to USB. Yeah, so Mary, you can do that if you have a Macintosh. So if you have an Apple computer, then you can plug in your Apple computer and you're going to use something called Sidecar. And then you can turn your iPad into a drawing tablet. That would be a Sidecar situation. If you don't have an Apple and you have a PC, then you're going to use something called, is it Luma? There is a way to do that on the PC, but it's a thing that you have to buy that converts it into the same thing. But if you're going Mac to Mac or Apple to Apple, it's called Sidecar. That works really well. So.
Okay.
Cool. Other questions, Colby?
No, that was super good. Flatting colors seems pretty straightforward and a lot easier. I've been doing similar things in Illustrator, and it's also like a handful of steps, but good to know how to do it here as well. And that gives you a lot of control for colors and highlights. So it looks super good. I'm excited to start using it on some of the projects. It'll be awesome.
Cool. Yeah. Cool. So the gist is selection that's just inside of the outer edge of the inks, and then fill it with a color. And that's
okay.
that's kind
and you go back over and add highlights and details as much as you want to. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Cool. Okay, that's good to know.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Sweet. Thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay, hang tight. I'm gonna go off the air. I'll see you guys later.